Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let us get started. Global markets hovered near record highs and investors reviewed a new set of U.S. tariffs. Wall Street indices struggled to advance for the third week in a row ahead of the start of the earnings season next week. For now, investors are overlooking tariffs between 25 and 30% on Canada, Brazil, and Japan, and blanket tariffs between 15 and 20% on all other trading partners. The Trump administration is struggling to sign even 3 deals after promising as many as 200 in the first 90 days of the start of the global tariff war in early April. So far, the Trump administration has failed to convince 5 key trading partners to go along with high tariffs, despite the U.S. president's persistent threats and his willingness to link defense and trade issues. In the absence of any key economic releases this week in the U.S., we begin our global economic review with Europe and then to Asia. The Eurozone annual retail sales increase slowed to 1.8% in May from 2.7% in the previous month. High uncertainty, consumers are less willing to part with their wage increases and contribute to sluggish economic growth in the second quarter. Investors are bracing for weak GDP growth data in the second quarter amid weak retail sales growth and contractions in the service sector. The UK house price index slowed to 2.5% annual growth, the lowest in 11 months and flat from a year ago. The average house price eased only 1% to £296,665, with mortgage approvals and number of transactions picking up after a slowdown following changes in stamp duty in spring. The property market resilience was driven by higher wages, flexible mortgage lenders, and stable interest rate environments. In Asia, China's inflation report confirmed ongoing price weakness for the third consecutive year. The consumer price inflation edged up to 0.1% after declining in 4 consecutive months, and core inflation edged up to 0.7%. The uptick in consumer price inflation was marginal as businesses engaged in price war to drum up sales, and small and medium-sized businesses resorted to layoffs and pay cuts or pay freeze. In addition, subdued domestic demand contributed to weak export outlook because of the ongoing U.S. tariff war. Producer price deflation extended to the 33rd consecutive month and dropped to 3.6% and fell at the fastest pace in 2 years. In other economic news, the UK's trade deficit shrank in May after exports rose faster than imports. Exports rose 1.2% from the previous month to £74.3 billion, while imports edged up by 0.1% to £80 billion. Service exports expanded 0.5% to about £45 billion, and imports eased 0.2% to a 4-month low of £50 billion, driven by reduced imports of refined oil from the Netherlands and lower imports of ships and aircraft from the U.S. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury edged up to 4.42% after the new tariffs threats stoked fears of higher for longer interest rates. Texas crude oil prices advanced 4% to $68 a barrel amid expectations of supply challenges, and traders focused on near-term tight supply conditions amid elevated tensions in the Persian Gulf. Natural gas prices in Europe increased 6% to €35 per megawatt hour, supported by warmer weather conditions on the continent and a stable fuel supply. The euro hovered near the 2021 high at $1.17 amid mounting trade tensions that continued to dampen investor sentiment. The yen declined 2% to 147 amid rising global trade tensions after a series of aggressive tariffs were announced by the U.S. president. Let us shift our attention to major stock markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite gained for the third consecutive week amid earnings optimism and continued belief that the U.S. president will back down from his aggressive tariff stance. The European markets advanced for the week despite weakness for the last two sessions as traders awaited details of the U.S.-EU trade negotiations. The Nikkei 225 stock average dropped for the second consecutive week amid protracted U.S. trade-Japan negotiations and a 25% U.S. tariff on Japanese goods proposed by the U.S. president. Hong Kong and China indices trimmed weekly gains as investors worried that persistent consumer price deflation driven by unhealthy competition could dampen economic growth in the second half. Indian market indices declined for the second week in a row amid rising global trade tensions and ahead of the start of the earnings seasons next week. We now shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings update from leading companies last week. Delta Airlines soared after the international carrier reinstated its annual outlook and delivered earnings ahead of market expectations. Levi Strauss company advanced after the denim maker reported better than expected quarterly results and raised its annual sales growth outlook. PriceSmart reported stronger than expected sales in the latest quarter, and the discount retailer announced its expansion plans in Chile. WD-40 reported weak sales growth, but earnings surpassed market estimates in the latest quarter. Bassett Furniture advanced after the furniture maker's net income swung to a profit in the fiscal second quarter ending in May. BP plc, the UK-based energy giant, said lower natural gas and crude oil prices are likely to impact revenues, and upstream output is ahead of the previous estimates. The company said oil refining margins shrank sharply from the previous quarter, and separately the company said it agreed to sell 300 retail stations in the Netherlands. Brunello Cucinelli, the Italian luxury fashion group, reported a 10% increase in sales in the latest quarter, driven by strong demand growth in three core markets in the European Union, the U.S., and Asia. In the week ahead, investors in the U.S. are looking forward to the release of consumer inflation report and producer price inflation report, and overall consumer inflation report is expected to rise to 2.6%, and core inflation is likely to rebound to 3%. On the earnings front, banks are scheduled to kick off the earnings season, including results from J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and American Express. In Europe, UK's inflation rate is expected to stay 3.4%, and jobless rate is likely to stay at a four-year high of 4.6%. Eurozone industrial production and trade data from the Euro area, Switzerland, Spain, and Italy are on tap as well. On the earnings front, investors are awaiting results from Experian, Ericsson, Novartis, ABB, Atlas Copco, Saab, Volvo, Rio Tinto, Aeroports de Paris, and ASML Holding. In Asia, China is scheduled to release its international trade data, which could provide insights into the impact of the U.S. tariffs. Japan's GDP, industrial production, and retail sales are also on the economic calendar this week. Next week, India will release its inflation data, which could influence the Reserve Bank of India's monetary policy stance. On the earnings front, investors are awaiting results from Reliance Industries, TSMC, Woori Financial Group, Toho Corp, and Tokyo Steel. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on rodera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com, review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see you next week.